So this is a very optimistic kind of statement attributed to the ex-tennis player Boris Becker, who is reported on page 11 of the Times today, 26th of October 2020, as saying, "I trust the British justice system to find the truth," insists bankrupt Becker. This is a case that is being brought against Becker by the Insolvency Service, about which we have a lot to say in due course. Mr. Becker denied reports in the German media that he had been released on bail, saying that he had handed his passport to his lawyers and could travel so long as he gave 48 hours notice. After a recent working trip to Munich, a lot of people said, "We thought you had to give up your passport," he said. I replied, "Yes." So I swam down the Thames and I crossed the Channel. Then I dug a tunnel in Hamburg and secretly crawled out the other end in Munich. Since winning Wimbledon in 1985, Mr. Becker is estimated to have earned about £100 million from sponsorship and endorsement deals. Now, the Insolvency Service is now fronted by, now part of the Alok বিশ্বাস. Is it Alok বিশ্বাস? This is Alok, the business secretary who is chronologically succeeded Greg Clark. And the Insolvency Service has been kind of slightly reorganized, I think. But the Insolvency Service is itself not very solvent in terms of integrity and in terms of the rigor which it should apply. And I am speaking about a case that involves a very large sum of money. In fact, more or less, this case actually concerns the same set of claims that actually relates to claims against the Tower Hamlets Council, Newham Council, Tower Hamlets Community Housing, Spitalfields Small Business Association, and a number of others. So the claims actually cover different aspects of the conduct and behavior that contributed to and caused the losses that we have been talking about in the sums of billions of pounds. So with every passing day, the amount of claim actually rises exponentially. And the claims include claims about the interference with and removal of or concealment of and tampering with intellectual properties. And the list of defendants in the claims exceeds at least 100. So this is not something that can be factually adequately described in an updated kind of broadcast like this one, which lasts less than an hour or around an hour. Even if it lasts more than an hour, it still would be very insufficient time to contain the details of the update, let alone the actual original claims. Suffice to say that the headline in the Times given to Boris Becker's trust or faith in British justice, which is what we're trying to get there. Yes, I trust British justice. That is the kind of statement that is completely kind of false. For a start, there is no such thing as British justice. If he thinks that British justice is what is delivered by the court system, there is no justice in the court system. Secondly, if he thinks that the kind of space that he has been given, which is unwarranted, because that statement is a kind of positive plug and spin for him, that is not given to people who have got greater amounts and greater kind of volumes of claims against other parties, but who are treated with discrimination and prejudice by the corrupt and racist system. The existence of the various so-called ombudsmen, that is to say, the informal kind of outside of the court system operations and bodies that are supposed to be regulating various activities in specific fields, like there is a regulator called Financial Conduct Authority that is supposed to regulate the conduct of banks. And there is a similar thing for broadcasting called Ofcom that is supposed to regulate broadcasters' conduct. And there is a thing called the Legal Ombudsman, which is supposed to regulate the conduct of lawyers, licensed law traders. There is no regulator to regulate the conduct of members of the judiciary, no matter what level of the judiciary they are kind of in or at. For example, the county courts, the magistrates' courts, and the crown courts, and the high court, these are occupied by occupants called judges or masters, recorders, etc. And they enjoy impunity from all accountability. Now, as has been said, the list of defendants exceeding 100 means that it is a very hefty task. And who can actually undertake a task that involves so many defendants? And with every defendant, even if there is only 10 pages of factual details attaching to the liabilities of each defendant, it will be 1,000 pages. And 1,000 pages will contain enough data, evidence, and investigative kind of requirements that would require the attention and the full-time service of dozens of expert and very clearly competent individuals. So that is the kind of size of the obstruction that exists in the British legal system. So there is no British kind of, what the Times is saying, British justice. There is no British justice. It is totally staked against anyone seeking justice, and it is a very unjust and persistently unjust kind of set up, organized obstruction against any justice. Each individual licensed law trader can enjoy lifelong kind of impunity from accountability. Any actual prosecution or disciplining of the wrongdoer, it happens by accident. And anyone who has to go through the court system that Boris Becker is kind of going through now would need the equivalent of resources, equivalent of millions of pounds, because this is the kind of amounts of money that are charged by the licensed law traders. And the impunity they have is that even if they fail to represent the righteous claims of a righteous claimant, they are above accountability. So they can keep the money and they can sink the person that had the misfortune of having to go through a solicitor or a lawyer or the barrister, licensed law trading barrister, licensed law trading solicitor. And this is the piece that is in contrast to today's Guardian. On the front page, there is a piece about the 800 former judges and members of the licensed law trade, that is barristers and solicitors, who have written a letter or statement that the Guardian is relying on. And those 800 are railing against the threat to the safety, personal safety of so many licensed law traders that is put at risk by the statements issued by Boris Johnson and the Interior Minister, Priti Patel, for their role in defending particular defendants that the government doesn't want defended or supported by lawyers or legal representation. So that is the reality. There is no justice because the government itself is violating, as the lawyer said, not due process, but rule of law, which is the phrase that should have been used in the earlier edition. It is not the due process that the lawyers are complaining about. It's the rule of law that they're complaining about as being broken by Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. These are two phrases that are very similar in many respects. Due process and rule of law are very similar to one another. And they are actually complementary to each other. They complement each other. Without due process, rule of law cannot exist, and vice versa. But the culture, the narrative being fronted by and being presented by Boris Johnson is one that actually challenges and denies the need for rule of law, denies the rule of law as well as the due process. And it's the same kind of mentality that has been seen by the behavior or in the behavior of previous occupants in the post of prime minister, conservative prime minister. Not every single one, but there have been others, and most certainly the utterances of Margaret Thatcher are very much being echoed intentionally by Boris Johnson, who wants to create the impression that he is like the Iron Lady. His previous attempts have been to come across as Winston Churchill, but the popular imagination is currently at a level about Winston Churchill that he's not very kind of worthy role model. And that has not yet been established about Thatcher, although To the victims of Thatcher's policies and behavior, she never had any high stock morally. So, but the conservatives are still regarding Thatcher and her so-called legacy as worth following, which is why Boris Johnson is now kind of coming across as being more Thatcher than Churchill. And the same kind of tactic and the same approach applies very much to Priti Patel, who comes across as being even more vicious and more hateful in her words and in her kind of approach than any right-wing conservative women in politics have been. It's like overdoing the mental slavery bit on the part of Priti Patel. She wants to impress the racists and the Little Englanders that she is more racist and more Little English than the Little Englanders themselves. And so therefore the tussle between the licensed law traders and the regime fronted by Boris Johnson illustrates the absence of any acceptable kind of list of priorities and list of values to be found in the legal system, which is what Boris Becker, the German ex-tennis player, is praising. Now, Boris Becker is praising as a tactical kind of spin. It's not something that he believes in. That is what he's doing in order to come across as being kind of respectful of the English legal system. The reason being that his trial is taking place in a crown court, Southwark Crown Court, across the river, just from the Tower of London. And it's within 100 years or 200 years or 300 years of the headquarters of the mayor at the expense of London, the City Hall. So if the legal aid system is responsible for all the wrong claims being pushed through the court system, which is what Boris Johnson's condemnation of the legal aid solicitors or legal aid lawyers or legally aided lawyers representing Shamima Begum, if that is what there is to it, then that shows that there is no acceptance of the rule of law or due process by the person who is in place as the prime minister at the time. And so therefore there is no assumption that accepts any citizens or any law-abiding person's right to challenge executive power and behavior and all the rest of it. I mean, there is a woman, Dina Rose, who is an Oxford academic and also a QC, that she is a licensed law trading barrister carrying the banner of a QC. Now, she has been given a positive favorite kind of spot in the Guardian today as part of their coverage of the 800 lawyers and ex-judges condemnation of Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. Now, there is no content in anything that the Guardian has published that shows any acknowledgement on the part of the former members of the judiciary or the current members of the licensed law trading organizations of the right of the person who is not a licensed law trader to have an audience, to have the freedom to represent themselves in the court system. And that is the victim. That is the main casualty of the over-dominance of the licensed law trading branches, that is the solicitors and the barristers. It's the licensed law trader's certificate to trade as a lawyer that is the passport to the courtroom and the passport to the kind of right to have audience, that is to say, the right to appear before a court. This is nothing to do with the facts, nothing to do with the evidence, nothing to do with the actual agenda in operation that actually underlies any particular case that needs to be fairly hard and presented in a court. So here is the kind of list of things that can be completely illegal, unlawful, wrong acts being imposed on the proceedings and thus sink the actual claim and claimants' claims. What happened in the case of the Tower Hamlets community housing criminals stealing the money of a tenant that led to the THCH, Tower Hamlets community housing, bringing a series of eviction proceedings against the same tenant who was owed money by the Tower Hamlets community housing. The Tower Hamlets community housing took the tenant to court for eviction over arrears of few £100, while Tower Hamlets community housing at the same time owed nearly £2,000 to the same tenant. That was to do with the fact that Tower Hamlets community housing had wrongly previously, in December 2006, between September and December 2006, had extracted £3,000 on the ground that they said, THCH said, they were owed rent, which is a lie, because the rent arrears were caused by Steve Hill, an employee in Tower Hamlets Council in the post of benefits manager. Steve Hill, the liar, conspired with Mike Tyrrell, the liar at the THCH. And between the two of them, they confected, they manufactured, they invented, they created rent arrears, which could then be used as the pretext for the first of a series of applications by THCH to have the tenant who was in credit actually evicted on the grounds of arrears. All these facts are known to the particular county court. And yet, despite the knowledge, the county court failed or chose to not act on the series of criminality perpetrated by Steve Hill and Mike Tyrrell and THCH. So we shall be updating on this in due course, probably in one of the next editions.